The massive crystal spires of Zerion Prime stretched toward the purple sky like frozen lightning. Deep within the largest tower, the Zephyrian High Council gathered in their sacred chamber. The air hummed with psychic energy as dozens of tall, blue-skinned beings took their positions around the circular room. Elder Counselor Vexitar stood at the center, his ancient eyes glowing with inner light. He had lived for over 3,000 years and had seen empires rise and fall across the galaxy. Today he felt troubled by the discussion that was about to take place. Council members, Vextar began, his voice echoing through their shared mental link. We gather to discuss the expansion into human territory. I must remind you of the ancient warnings in our archives. Council leader Thainville stepped forward. He was younger than Vextar by half, but his ambition burned bright. His purple robes marked him as a military leader, and scars on his blue skin showed he had fought in many battles. Elder Vextar speaks of old stories, Thainville said, his mental voice sharp with impatience. The humans are a primitive species. They have no psychic abilities. Their technology is centuries behind ours. What threat could they possibly pose to the mighty Zephyrian Empire? Vextar walked to the ancient data crystal that held their oldest records. With a touch of his hand, the crystal began to glow, and holographic text appeared in the air. The words were written in the dead language of the progenitors. The first, race to achieve space travel. Listen carefully, Vextar said. These words were written by the progenitors themselves, 20,000 years ago. They learned this lesson through pain and loss. The translation appeared in modern Zephyrian script. Of all species that roam the void, none are more dangerous when cornered than humans. They possess a mind that refuses logic when survival is at stake. Never trap them, for they will find 17 ways to escape when mathematics says there are none. Their greatest strength lies not in their bodies or their machines, but in their absolute refusal to accept defeat. Several council members shifted nervously, but Thainville laughed. The sound was harsh in the mental space they shared. Fairy tales, he said. The progenitors fell to their own pride, not to any human threat. Besides, humans barely existed when this was written. They were still hitting rocks together on their little blue world. The warning speaks of their nature, not their technology, Vextar replied. I have studied the human conflicts. They fight wars that should be impossible to win. They survive situations that should kill them. They adapt faster than any species we have encountered. Adapt? Thainville's mental voice dripped with scorn. We are masters of adaptation. We can reshape matter with our thoughts. We can read minds across star systems. What adaptation could possibly match our power? On the other side of the galaxy, Commander Jake Morrison stood on the bridge of the exploration ship Terra's Pride. He was a tall man with kind brown eyes and graying hair at his temples. His uniform was simple blue and gray, marking him as an officer in Earth's exploration fleet. Commander, we're receiving a transmission from the Zephyrian Empire, said Nick Sullivan from the communications station. Nick was young, maybe 25, with red hair and freckles. He had joined the crew straight from the academy. Put it through, Nick, Jake said. He had heard of the Zephyrians but had never met one. Earth had only made contact with them 6 months ago through long-range signals. The main screen shimmered, and a tall blue figure appeared. It was a Zephyrian diplomat, dressed in flowing silver robes. When it spoke, its voice was smooth and musical. Greetings, Commander Morrison. I am Ambassador Lixandra of the Zephyrian Empire. We extend an invitation for you and your crew to visit our diplomatic station. We wish to discuss trade agreements that could benefit both our peoples. Jake looked around at his crew. Lisa Carter, his pilot, raised an eyebrow. She was a small woman with dark skin and quick hands that never seemed to stop moving. Sounds too good to be true, Commander, she said quietly. Pete Johnson, the ship's engineer, scratched his beard. He was a big man with gentle eyes who could fix anything with moving parts. Could be legitimate, he said. Earth needs new trading partners. Dr. Amy Rodriguez, their medical officer, frowned at her scanner readings. She was a careful woman who believed in facts over feelings. I'm not detecting any deception in the ambassador's biosigns, but that doesn't mean much with an alien species. Jake considered the options. Earth was still new to galactic politics. They needed allies and trading partners. But something felt wrong about the invitation. "Ambassador," Jake said, "we appreciate the offer. Can you tell us more about what kind of trade agreements you have in mind?" "Details can be discussed when you arrive," the ambassador replied. "We have prepared comfortable quarters for you and your crew. The station has everything you need for an extended stay." "Extended stay?" Jake thought. That was an odd way to phrase it. "How long are we talking about?" Jake asked. "As long as necessary," the ambassador said with what might have been a smile. "We believe in thorough negotiations." Back on Zerion Prime, the council continued their debate. Thainville had convinced most of the members that capturing a human crew would provide valuable intelligence about Earth's capabilities. "Think of it as research," Thainville argued. "We take a small crew, study their responses, learn their weaknesses. Then we can approach Earth from a position of strength." "And if they escape?" Vexitar asked. "From our station?" "Impossible. We have designed holding facilities that can contain any known species. The humans will be completely helpless." Vexitar touched the crystal again, reading more of the ancient text. "The progenitors write of something they called human creativity. They describe it as the ability to see solutions where none exist, to find hope in hopeless situations." "Superstition," Thainville said firmly. "We are the masters of this galaxy. Our technology is beyond anything humans can imagine. What could they possibly do against us?" The vote was called. Despite Vexitar's warnings, the council voted to proceed with Thainville's plan. They would invite a human crew to their station, trap them and study them. It seemed like a simple plan with no risks. Vexitar cast the only vote against the plan. As the council dispersed, he remained by the crystal, reading the ancient warnings over and over. The progenitors had been wise and powerful, but they had vanished from the galaxy long ago. Were their warnings just the fears of a dying race, or were they hard-earned wisdom that should not be ignored? On Terra's Pride, Jake made his decision. Earth needed allies, and the crew was experienced enough to handle any problems that might arise. "Ambassador, we accept your invitation. When would you like us to arrive?" "Immediately, if possible. We are eager to begin our friendship." Jake nodded to Lisa, who began setting course for the coordinates the ambassador provided. As the ship turned toward Zephyrian space, none of the humans knew they were flying directly into a trap that had been prepared specifically for them. The oldest galactic law was about to be tested once again, and the Zephyrians were about to learn why that law existed in the first place. 3 days later, Terra's Pride approached the Zephyrian diplomatic station called Eternal Dominion. The structure was unlike anything the human crew had ever seen. It looked like a massive crystal flower floating in space, with dozens of sharp petals extending from a central core. Each petal was larger than Earth's biggest space station. "Holy cow," Pete Johnson whispered as he stared at the view screen. "That thing must be 50 kilometers across." Lisa Carter guided their ship toward the docking bay with steady hands, but Jake could see her eyes were wide with amazement. The docking bay alone was large enough to hold 100 ships their size. "Commander, they're sending docking instructions," Nick Sullivan reported. "Very detailed ones. They want us to dock at a specific port and shut down our engines completely. That's standard procedure for diplomatic visits," Dr. Amy Rodriguez said, though she sounded uncertain. "Isn't it?" Jake nodded, but something still felt wrong. The instructions were too specific, too controlling. But they had come this far, and Earth needed this alliance. "Follow their instructions, Lisa. Take us in." As Terra's Pride settled into the assigned docking port, mechanical arms extended from the station and locked onto their ship. Jake felt a slight vibration through the hull. "Docking clamps are very secure," Lisa reported. "Almost too secure. It would take a lot of force to break free." Ambassador Lixandra met them at the airlock, along with 6 Zephyrian guards. The guards were tall and imposing, with silver armor that seemed to flow like liquid metal. They carried no visible weapons, but Jake's military training told him they were dangerous. "Welcome to Eternal Dominion," the ambassador said with that strange smile. "Please follow me to your quarters. You must be tired from your journey. The corridors of the station were beautiful but confusing. They curved and twisted in ways that made no sense to human eyes. The walls were made of the same crystal material as the exterior, and they glowed with soft blue light. The station is quite large, Jake said, trying to make conversation. How many people live here? Many thousands, the ambassador replied. We have guests from dozens of species, all very comfortable, all very secure. The way she said secure made Jake's stomach tighten. He caught Amy's eye and saw his own concern reflected there. Their quarters were luxurious. Each crew member had a private room with a bed, desk, and what looked like entertainment systems. The main sitting area had comfortable chairs and a table set for dinner. Please sit, the ambassador said. We have prepared a welcome feast in your honor. The food was strange but delicious. It tasted like familiar Earth dishes but looked completely alien. As they ate, more Zephyrians joined them. They introduced themselves as scientists, diplomats, and cultural specialists. We are very interested in human culture, said one scientist named Kextal. Tell us, how do humans handle stress? How do you solve problems when there seems to be no solution? The questions seemed innocent enough, but Jake noticed they were all focused on human psychology and behavior. Every answer was carefully recorded by devices the Zephyrians carried. You seem very interested in how our minds work, Lisa said with a slight smile. She had always been good at reading people, even alien people. Of course, Kextal replied. Understanding is the key to friendship, don't you think? After dinner, the ambassador stood up. I hope you will forgive us, but we must ask you to remain in your quarters for tonight. Station security requires it. Remain in our quarters? Jake asked. Are we prisoners? Oh no, the ambassador laughed. Simply a precaution. You are unfamiliar with our station, and we would not want you to get lost. The corridors can be quite confusing. Jake stood up as well. I think we'd prefer to return to our ship for the night. The ambassador's smile faded slightly. I'm afraid that won't be possible. Your ship is undergoing routine safety inspections. For your own protection, of course. The Zephyrian guards moved closer, and Jake realized they were trapped. He looked at his crew and saw they understood too. Pete's hands were clenched into fists. Lisa was looking around the room, probably calculating distances and exits. Amy was studying the guards, trying to understand their weaknesses. Nick looked scared but determined. I see, Jake said calmly. Then I suppose we have no choice. You are wise, Commander Morrison. Please make yourselves comfortable. Tomorrow, we will begin our negotiations. After the Zephyrians left, Jake heard the soft hum of energy barriers activating. He walked to the door and tried to open it. Nothing happened. Well, Pete said, we're definitely prisoners. The question is, why? Amy said. She was scanning the walls with her medical tricorder. These energy readings are off the charts. Whatever's keeping us here is very powerful. Lisa was at the window, looking out at their ship. I can see Terra's Pride from here. There are Zephyrians crawling all over it. They're not inspecting it. They're studying it. Nick had found something interesting. Commander, take a look at this. He was pointing at what looked like artwork on the wall, but as Jake got closer, he could see it wasn't decoration. It was text, written in several different languages. Warning messages, Jake realized. From other prisoners. Amy came over to look. This one's in Altarian script. It says they study minds. Never show fear. Stay strong. And this one, Lisa pointed to another section. It's in binary code, simple computer language. It says find patterns. They have patterns. All systems have weaknesses. Pete was examining the energy barrier at the door. This is some serious technology, but Nick's right about patterns. Everything has patterns. Jake felt something he hadn't experienced in years. The cold certainty that he and his crew were in real danger, but he also felt something else stirring inside him. It was the same feeling he'd had during the war, when his unit was trapped behind enemy lines. It was the feeling that giving up was not an option. Listen up, he said quietly. gathering his crew around him. We're in trouble, real trouble. But we're not dead yet, and as long as we're alive, we keep fighting. Fighting with what? Nick asked. They took our weapons. We're locked in a box made of energy fields we can't break. We fight with what we've always fought with, Jake replied. Our minds, our refusal to quit. Our ability to work together. Amy nodded slowly. The warning messages suggest other species have been trapped here, but they're still alive enough to leave warnings. That means escape is possible. Or they just want to give us hope before they crush it, Pete said. But he didn't sound defeated. He sounded angry, and angry Pete was a dangerous Pete. Lisa was still studying the room. They made one mistake already. They put us all together. If they were smart, they would have separated us. Maybe they think it doesn't matter, Nick suggested. Maybe they think we're helpless no matter what. Jake smiled, and it wasn't a pleasant smile. Then they're about to learn something about humans that they should have learned from history. In the central command center of Eternal Dominion, Thainville watched the humans through hidden cameras. They were talking quietly, gesturing to each other, examining their prison. They looked calm, almost relaxed. Curious, said Kextall, who was monitoring their biological signs. Most species show extreme stress at this point. The humans seem almost comfortable. They're probably in shock, Thainville said dismissively. Give them time to understand their situation, then they'll break like all the others. But Vextar's ancient warnings echoed in his mind, and for the first time Thainville wondered if he had made a terrible mistake. The trap was set. The humans were caught. But as Jake Morrison and his crew began to plan their escape from an impossible prison, the Zephyrians were about to discover that trapping a human was the most dangerous thing anyone could do in the galaxy. The first night in their crystal prison, the human crew learned quickly that they were being watched constantly. Tiny sensors in the walls tracked their movements, their breathing, even their heart rates. But Jake Morrison had spent years in military intelligence, and he knew how to communicate without words. During their second day of captivity, Jake began teaching his crew a simple sign language. He pretended to stretch his arms while actually spelling out letters with his fingers. Lisa caught on first, being a pilot who understood the importance of silent communication in dangerous situations. They watch everything, Jake signed while appearing to scratch his shoulder. Not everything, Lisa signed back while fixing her hair. Blind spots near ceiling corners. Pete Johnson was having his own discoveries. The big engineer had been studying the energy barrier that kept them trapped. While the others talked about normal things, he used his hands to test different parts of the wall. The energy field vibrates, he whispered to Amy during what looked like a casual conversation. Everything that vibrates has a frequency, and every frequency has a weakness. Dr. Amy Rodriguez was learning about their captors by watching how they behaved. Every day, Zephyrian scientists came to ask questions and run tests. They wanted to measure human reactions to stress, fear, and hopelessness. Tell us about human emotions, Dr. Kextall said during one of these sessions. How do you handle situations where escape is impossible? Escape is never impossible, Amy replied calmly. That's something humans learn very young. There's always another option even if you can't see it yet. Kextall made notes on his device. But logically, you must understand that your situation is hopeless. Our technology is far beyond yours. This station is designed to hold any species in the galaxy. Any species except humans, apparently, Amy said with a slight smile. Otherwise, you wouldn't need to study us so carefully. The scientist looked uncomfortable, and Amy filed that reaction away for later use. Nick Sullivan was making his own kind of progress. As the communications expert, he understood that all advanced technology used some form of quantum mechanics. During the daily questioning sessions, he listened carefully to how the Zephyrians talked to each other. They're using quantum entanglement for their telepathy, he told Jake during one of their careful signing conversations. If I can figure out the frequency, maybe I can tap into it. Can you jam it? Jake signed back. Maybe. Or maybe I can use it to send our own messages. On the third day, something interesting happened. During their exercise period in a larger room, they met other prisoners. There were 3 Altarians, a species of tall, graceful beings with silver skin, 2 hegemony drones, cybernetic creatures that looked like a cross between robots and insects, and 1 Velnari, a being that looked like living crystal with too many arms. The Altarians had been prisoners for 2 years. The drones had been there for 6 months. The Velnari had been trapped for over a decade. "You are new," said one of the Altarians, a female named Silandra. "We tried to warn you, but our messages in your quarters were old. We did not think they would be seen." "We saw them," Jake said quietly. "Thank you. How many others have been here?" "Many," Silandra replied sadly. "Some are moved to other parts of the station. Some—" She paused. "Some are taken away and never return. One of the hegemony drones, a unit designated XK-47, buzzed electronically. Escape attempts 732. Success rate 0%. Zephyrian security adapts to all strategies." "All alien strategies," Lisa said. "But have any humans tried to escape before?" "Negative. You are first human specimens." The Velnari spoke in a voice like wind chimes. "The crystal beings underestimate flesh creatures. They believe their mind superior. They do not understand creativity." "What do you mean?" Pete asked. "We think in patterns they know. You think in patterns they cannot predict. This is why they study you." That night, Jake gathered his crew for what looked like a normal discussion about their situation, but using their hidden sign language, they began to plan. "Pattern analysis," Jake signed. "Guards change every 6 hours. Sensors sweep every 43 seconds. Energy barrier fluctuates during power grid cycles." Lisa had been timing everything she could observe. "I can predict the fluctuations now. There's a pattern, but it's complex." Pete had made another discovery. "The walls conduct the energy from a central source. If I can overload the system during a fluctuation—" "Can you build anything?" Amy signed. "To help with overload?" Pete smiled and pointed to his mouth. "Dental fillings. Titanium alloy. Perfect conductor." Amy understood immediately. "My medical scanner uses electromagnetic pulses. If I reverse the polarity during your overload—" Nick added his own piece to the puzzle. "I found their quantum frequency. During the next shift change, I can create feedback in their communication system." Jake felt something stir in his chest. It was hope, but more than that. It was the peculiar human ability to see a way forward when logic said there was no way. His crew was doing what humans had always done: adapting, improvising, and refusing to accept defeat. The Zephyrians, watching from their command center, were growing frustrated. "Their stress levels are actually decreasing," Dr. Kextal reported. "To Thainville. This should not be possible. They are trapped with no hope of escape, yet their biological signs suggest they are becoming more relaxed. Perhaps they are accepting their fate," Thainville suggested. "No," Kextal said, studying his readings. "They are exhibiting the same patterns we see in Zephyrian soldiers before a battle. They are planning something." "Planning what?" "They have no tools, no weapons, no way to affect the station systems." Kextal looked troubled. "I don't know. But Elder Vextar was right about one thing. Human psychology is unlike any other species we have encountered." In their cell, the human crew continued their preparations. Each of them had found small ways to affect their environment. Lisa discovered that her movements could create tiny resonances in the crystal walls. Pete found that the energy field had microscopic weak points that could be exploited. Amy learned that the medical sensors could be fooled into thinking she was sick, drawing guards closer to the energy barrier. Nick realized that human brainwaves could interfere with Zephyrian quantum communications if timed correctly. None of these discoveries would have been enough on their own. But humans had another trait that the Zephyrians didn't understand. They were incredibly good at combining small advantages into larger ones. On the 4th night, Jake looked around at his crew and felt proud. They were scared. They were far from home, and they were trapped in a prison designed by a civilization thousands of years more advanced than Earth. But they hadn't given up. They hadn't broken. They were doing what humans did best, finding a way forward when there shouldn't be one. The Zephyrians thought they understood human psychology. They had studied human history, human behavior, human reactions. But they had missed the most important thing about humans: their absolute refusal to believe that any situation was truly hopeless. Tomorrow, they would begin to learn why the ancient warning existed. Tomorrow, they would discover what happened when you trapped a human and gave them time to think. The oldest galactic law was about to be proven right once again. The escape began at exactly 0347 station time, during the shift change when the guards were distracted and the power grid cycled to its lowest point. Jake Morrison had timed everything perfectly, but even he was amazed at how smoothly his crew executed their impossible plan. Lisa Carter started first. She had spent days learning the exact rhythm of the station's rotation and the way the crystal walls resonated with its movement. Now, as she walked casually around their cell, her footsteps created tiny vibrations that matched the station's natural frequency. To anyone watching, she looked like a restless prisoner pacing nervously. In reality, she was creating a harmonic cascade that would travel through the station's crystal structure like ripples in a pond. Pete Johnson was ready for the next phase. He had been complaining of tooth pain for 2 days, holding his jaw and wincing whenever the guards looked at him. The Zephyrians had scanned him and found his dental work, but they saw it as harmless metal fillings. They didn't understand that those titanium alloy fillings could become powerful electromagnetic conductors under the right conditions. As Lisa's vibrations reached their peak, Pete bit down hard on a small piece of crystal he had secretly chipped from the wall. The sharp pain caused his body to produce a natural electrical pulse, and his dental fillings amplified that pulse into a focused electromagnetic burst. Amy Rodriguez was monitoring everything with her medical scanner, which she had been openly using to check on her crew's health. The Zephyrians saw nothing suspicious about a doctor running medical scans. They didn't realize she had been slowly modifying the scanner's settings, turning it from a passive monitoring device into an active electromagnetic weapon. When Pete's pulse reached the energy barrier, Amy triggered her scanner's modified pulse pattern. The combination of Pete's signal and her electromagnetic burst created a resonance feedback loop in the barrier's power grid. For exactly 3 seconds, the energy field holding them prisoner flickered and weakened. Nick Sullivan was ready. He had been practicing a specific breathing pattern that created unique brainwave frequencies. As the barrier weakened, he focused all his mental energy on transmitting a simple message on the Zephyrian quantum communication frequency. System failure. Evacuate Section 7. The message went directly into the heads of every Zephyrian on the station, appearing to come from their own security system. Jake Morrison moved the instant the barrier flickered. 3 seconds was barely enough time to breathe, but Jake had been preparing for this moment. He lunged at the weakened energy field with a piece of torn fabric wrapped around his fist. The fabric was from Amy's medical kit, treated with conducting gel from her scanner. The energy barrier sparked and died. Alarms immediately began blaring throughout the station, but not the alarms the Zephyrians expected. Nick's false message had triggered evacuation protocols in Section 7, while the real security breach was happening in Section 5. Guards ran in the wrong direction while the humans slipped out of their cell, but Jake knew they had only minutes before the Zephyrians figured out what had happened. Their escape had to continue at maximum speed. Phase 2, he whispered, and his crew split up according to their plan. Lisa headed for the station's main power core. Her pilot training had taught her to think in 3 dimensions and understand complex energy systems. She had memorized the station's layout from the brief glimpses they had seen during their capture. Now she moved through the crystal corridors like she had lived there for years. Pete went to the docking bay where Terra's Pride was being held. His engineering knowledge would be essential for getting their ship ready to fly. More importantly, he knew how to sabotage the mechanical docking clamps that were holding their ship prisoner. Amy and Nick stayed together, heading for the holding cells where the other prisoners were kept. Jake had insisted that they couldn't leave without trying to free the aliens who had helped them understand their prison. Jake himself went to the command center. It was the most dangerous job, but he was the only one with enough military training to have a chance of success. The Zephyrians were completely unprepared for a multi-pronged escape attempt. Their sensors had been focused on the human quarters, and they had never imagined that prisoners could coordinate such a complex plan. Lisa reached the power core first. The chamber was enormous, filled with crystalline structures that pulsed with energy. She didn't try to destroy anything, which would have killed everyone on the station. Instead, she used her knowledge of harmonics to find the specific frequency that controlled the station's gravity systems. With careful manipulation of the power core's resonance, she created a cascading failure in the artificial gravity. Suddenly, guards throughout the station found themselves floating helplessly as gravity fluctuated between too strong and too weak. Pete reached the docking bay and immediately went to work on the mechanical clamps holding Terra's Pride. But he also did something the Zephyrians hadn't expected. He sabotaged every other ship in the bay. Using his knowledge of universal mechanical principles, he disabled the docking clamps on dozens of vessels, causing them to drift free and collide with each other. The bay became a chaos of floating ships and panicking alien crews. Amy and Nick found the other prisoners and quickly explained what was happening. The Altarians, hegemony drones, and Velnari had given up hope long ago, but the sight of humans actually escaping filled them with new determination. "How?" asked Silandra in amazement as Nick worked to disable the energy fields holding them. "We don't know how to give up," Amy replied simply. Jake's mission was the most difficult. The command center was heavily guarded and filled with armed Zephyrians. But he had two advantages: surprise and the fact that gravity was failing throughout the station. He used the chaos to his advantage, moving through air vents and maintenance shafts that the floating guards couldn't access. When he finally reached the command center, he found Thanevel shouting orders at confused technicians. "Impossible," Thanevel was saying. "How could primitive humans cause this much damage?" "Maybe you should have listened to the ancient warnings," Jake said as he emerged from an air vent behind the command chair. Thanevel spun around, his eyes wide with shock. "You? How did you get here?" "Same way we got out of your perfect prison," Jake replied, "by refusing to believe it was perfect." Jake didn't try to fight the Zephyrian leader. Instead, he accessed the station's communication system and broadcast a message throughout the galaxy. In simple, clear language, he explained what the Zephyrians had done: kidnapping diplomatic crews, illegal imprisonment, violation of galactic sovereignty laws. The message went out on all frequencies, reaching every species with space travel capability. "The galaxy will know what you've done," Jake told Thanevel, "and they'll know that humans don't make good prisoners." Throughout the station, the escape plan reached its climax. Lisa's power failures had disabled most of the security systems. Pete had their ship ready to fly and had created a debris field that made pursuit impossible. Amy and Nick had freed dozens of prisoners who were now spreading throughout the station, adding to the chaos. As Jake made his way back to the docking bay, he passed Elder Vextar in a corridor. The old Zephyrian looked at him with something that might have been respect. "The ancient warnings were true," Vexatar said quietly. "They usually are," Jake replied. "That's why they're called warnings." Terra's Pride blasted out of the docking bay just as Zephyrian security forces finally organized a response, but it was too late. The station was crippled. Dozens of prisoners had escaped, and Jake's message was already spreading across the galaxy. As their ship jumped to hyperspace, Lisa looked back at the crippled station. "Think they learned their lesson?" "Some of them did," Jake said, thinking of Elder Vextar, "but it doesn't matter. The galaxy learned the lesson, and that's what counts." The oldest galactic law had been proven once again. Never trap a human, because they will find a way out when logic says there isn't one. And when they escape, the whole galaxy will know what you did. The Zephyrian Empire's reputation was about to become their worst nightmare. 6 months after the escape from Eternal Dominion, Commander Jake Morrison stood before the Galactic Council on the neutral world of Harmony Station. Representatives from hundreds of species filled the vast assembly hall, and every eye was focused on the small group of humans at the center of the chamber. The evidence was overwhelming. Jake's broadcast from the Zephyrian station had been recorded and verified by dozens of independent sources. The freed prisoners had given testimony. Even some Zephyrians had come forward to confirm what had happened. "The charges are serious," announced Chancellor Mordek, the Galactic Council's leader. She was a member of the Ancient Wise Ones, a species that had been mediating galactic disputes for 10,000 years. Illegal imprisonment, violation of diplomatic immunity, kidnapping, and forced experimentation on sentient beings. Thainville stood in the defendant's section, no longer wearing the proud purple robes of a Zephyrian military leader. He had been stripped of rank and authority by his own people after the disaster at Eternal Dominion. His empire's reputation lay in ruins, and trade relationships that had taken centuries to build had collapsed overnight. "The defendant claims the humans were treated well," Chancellor Mordek continued. "He claims this was a legitimate scientific study, not illegal imprisonment." Jake stepped forward to address the council. His voice was calm and steady, but it carried clearly throughout the massive chamber. "Your Honor, the conditions of our imprisonment are not the issue. A cage made of gold is still a cage. We were diplomatic envoys invited for trade negotiations. Instead, we were trapped and studied like laboratory animals." "But you escaped," Thainville interrupted angrily. "You destroyed station property, caused injuries to my crew, and freed dangerous prisoners without authority." "Dangerous prisoners?" Jake turned to face the Zephyrian. "You mean the Altarians who had been held for 2 years without trial? The hegemony drones whose only crime was seeking asylum? The Velnari artist who was kidnapped while traveling to a cultural festival?" A murmur ran through the assembly. The freed prisoners were present as witnesses, and their stories had shocked even the most hardened galactic diplomats. Silandra, the Altarian female, spoke from the witness section. "We had given up hope of ever seeing our home worlds again. The humans not only freed themselves, they freed all of us. They risked their own escape to save strangers." XK-47, the hegemony drone, added its mechanical voice to the testimony. "Human behavior, irrational by computational standards. Logical course, escape immediately. Actual course, delay escape to assist other prisoners. Conclusion, humans value others' freedom above personal safety." Chancellor Mordek looked at Thainville with obvious disgust. "How do you justify holding these beings against their will?" Thainville's composure was cracking. "They were research subjects. We needed to understand their psychological profiles for the safety of the galaxy." "Whose safety?" Jake asked quietly. "Or did you mean your own safety? Were you afraid that free beings might threaten your empire's power?" The truth was obvious to everyone in the chamber. The Zephyrians hadn't been protecting the galaxy. They had been trying to understand and control other species to maintain their own dominance. Elder Vextar stepped forward from the Zephyrian delegation. The ancient counselor looked tired and ashamed as he addressed the assembly. "Your Honor, I must speak for the conscience of my people. I warned against this action. Our archives contain ancient wisdom about humans, wisdom we chose to ignore." He activated a holographic display showing the progenitor text that Jake had seen mentioned in their intelligence reports. 20,000 years ago, the progenitors wrote, "Never trap a human, for they will find 17 ways to escape when logic says there are none." We ignored this warning because we believed ourselves superior. We learned too late that the warning was not about human technology or strength. It was about something far more dangerous, the human spirit. Vextar turned to look directly at Jake and his crew. "You did not just escape our prison. You turned our greatest security asset into a liability. You used our own technology against us. You coordinated a plan that our computers said was impossible. And most importantly, you proved that the strongest walls and most advanced technology mean nothing against beings who refuse to accept defeat." The Galactic Council's decision was unanimous. The Zephyrian Empire was found guilty on all charges. Thainville was sentenced to exile, banned from holding any position of authority. The Empire was required to pay massive reparations to all the beings they had imprisoned. More significantly, the Zephyrian Empire lost its seat on the Galactic Council and was placed under economic sanctions that would take decades to lift. But the most important outcome was something that couldn't be measured in credits or political positions. The story of the human escape spread throughout the galaxy, becoming legend. Every species learned the same lesson. Humans were not to be underestimated, and definitely not to be trapped. Jake and his crew returned to Earth as heroes, but their real impact was on galactic politics. Suddenly, every major power wanted humans as allies, not enemies. Trade agreements that had been impossible to negotiate were suddenly offered freely. "It's amazing," Lisa Carter said as she piloted Terra's Pride on their next mission, this time to establish a permanent embassy with the Altarian Republic. 6 months ago, nobody in the galaxy knew humans existed. Now they're fighting over who gets to sign treaties with us. Pete Johnson was reading reports from Earth about new technological exchanges. "Seems like everyone wants to share their technology with us now. They figure if we can escape from Zephyrian prisons, we might have other useful tricks." Dr. Amy Rodriguez was analyzing medical data from their various new alien contacts. "It's not just technology. They want to understand how human psychology works. Every species is trying to figure out what makes us different." Nick Sullivan looked up from his communication console. "Speaking of which, Commander, we're getting another message from the Hegemony drones. They want to establish a strategic partnership with Earth. That's the 15th species this week." Jake smiled as he looked out at the stars ahead of them. "They think it's some kind of secret, some special human ability they can learn or copy. Isn't it?" Lisa asked. "No," Jake replied. "It's not a secret, and it's not something you can learn from a textbook. It's just who we are. Humans don't know how to give up. When you trap us, you don't break our spirit. You just give us time to figure out how to escape." On Zirion Prime, Elder Vextar stood once again before the ancient crystal that held the progenitor warnings. But now there was a new entry in the galactic archives, written in simple human language. To any species reading this, the ancient law exists for good reason. Humans are not dangerous because they are stronger or smarter than other species. They are dangerous because they refuse to believe that any situation is hopeless. When you trap a human, you are not containing a threat. You are creating one. The warning was signed by Commander Jake Morrison and the crew of Terra's Pride, and it was distributed to every world in the galaxy. Years later, in military academies and diplomatic schools across thousands of worlds, young beings studied the Eternal Dominion incident as a case study in psychology and strategy. The lesson was always the same: underestimate humans at your own peril. But perhaps the most important lesson was simpler than that. In a galaxy full of species that had learned to accept their limitations, humans remained the ones who refused to believe that limitations were permanent. They were the species that found 17 ways to escape when mathematics said there were none. And they were the species that would risk their own freedom to save strangers, because they believed that freedom was something everyone deserved. The oldest galactic law had been proven once again, but now it carried a new understanding. Never trap a human, not because they were dangerous enemies, but because they were the most dangerous thing in the galaxy. Beings who believed that hope and freedom were worth fighting for, no matter what the odds. As Terra's Pride jumped to hyperspace, on their way to another diplomatic mission, Jake Morrison looked at his crew and felt proud. They had not just escaped from an impossible prison. They had reminded the galaxy that some things, like the human spirit, could never be truly contained. The ancient warning would never be ignored again.